Even the smoothest Hollywood production will typically see filmmakers dealing with the ever-dreaded studio notes. These notes can come during pre-production, in the midst of shooting, or while wrapping things up in post. And while studio input might be limited where trusted auteur filmmakers are concerned, it goes without saying that they can sometimes make some deeply wild requests of the directors they work with. So I'm Gareth, this is What Culture, and here are 10 insane things that studios demanded in movies. Number 10. The Penguin Can't Smoke Cigars, The Batman. Smoking in movies has become noticeably less commonplace over the years, with most major studios choosing to heavily restrict depictions of tobacco use in their films, especially for projects aimed at younger viewers. All the same, when Colin Farrell was cast to play the Penguin in Matt Reeves' The Batman, he quite understandably assumed that he'd be smoking a cigar, as the iconic supervillain has in so many prior iterations. But Warner Brothers mandated that the character could not be shown smoking at all, and worse than that, he couldn't even be shown holding an unlit cigar, per their own content guidelines for PG-13 movies which could be viewed by impressionable younger audience members. Farrell fought valiantly for the cigar, but ultimately lost, an especially odd outcome given that The Batman is a film jam-packed with brutal murder, and yet a morally reprehensible supervillain can't commit the great sin of smoking a fat stogie. There was a silver lining to this though. For the spin-off TV series The Penguin, Farrell did indeed get his wish, and was freely able to smoke cigars throughout the show, much to his delight. Number 9. No 3D, no green light, Star Trek Into Darkness. In the early 2010s, it was incredibly common for 3D to be shoehorned into just about every major blockbuster release, regardless of whether it actually benefited the end product or not, largely because it was an easy way for studios to boost their box office revenues. But it was immensely rare for a film's entire commercial existence to be predicated on a 3D presentation, and yet that is precisely what happened with J.J. Abrams' Star Trek sequel, Star Trek Into Darkness. Right from the horse's mouth, Abrams himself revealed months before the movie's release that Paramount would not greenlight the film unless he agreed to produce a version of it in 3D. Abrams ultimately agreed upon the condition that it wouldn't be filmed in 3D, but instead post-converted, a far cheaper and less technically taxing method, albeit one which typically produces far less impressive results than shooting with native 3D cameras. Abrams added that he approached the post-conversion process very cynically, but ultimately enjoyed it, and that it didn't detract from him getting to make the 2D movie he actually wanted to make. After all, who the hell is watching Star Trek Into Darkness in 3D in 2025? Do you even know anyone who still has a 3D TV? Most of you probably forgot they were even a thing. Here's a question though, what movie did you actually enjoy watching in 3D? It's probably Avatar, isn't it? But still, let me know in the comments. Number 8. Velma Needs a Boyfriend, Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. Years before he became one of the most reliable filmmakers working in the superhero space, the brilliant James Gunn wrote both live-action Scooby-Doo movies, though one aspect of his vision was actually curtailed by Warner Brothers, making Velma gay. Gunn said that Velma was explicitly gay in his original draft of Scooby-Doo's script, but the studio kept interfering to water down Velma's queer identity and largely eliminate these elements from the script. A scene was actually filmed in which Velma kisses Daphne, though given Warner Brothers' clear mandate to stonewall even the faintest fleck of queerness in the film, it was cut and presumably remains locked away in a studio vault somewhere. Warner Brothers' efforts were pervasive enough that they even demanded that Velma have a boyfriend, Patrick Wisely, in sequel Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. And despite being a queer-coded icon for so long, it wasn't until 2022 that Velma finally came out as explicitly gay in a canonical Scooby-Doo project, the animated film Trick or Treat Scooby-Doo. Number 7. It can't be marketed as a comic book movie, Unbreakable. Hot off the success of M. Night Shyamalan's Oscar-nominated The Sixth Sense, Disney were all too keen to get back in business with the filmmaker for his buzzed-about follow-up project, Unbreakable. The Mouse House had one condition, however, that the marketing for Shyamalan's superhero thriller could not sell it as a comic book movie. Given the storming critical and commercial success of The Sixth Sense, Disney insisted that they market Unbreakable as another horror thriller reuniting Shyamalan with star Bruce Willis, rather than letting audiences know that it was really a deconstructionist superhero story. According to Shyamalan himself, Disney was skeptical about the wider commercial prospects of comic book films in 1999 when he was putting Unbreakable together, and so ensured that its trailers entirely ignored the superhero element. It was a cynical ploy, and one that ultimately did not pay off, as despite being well regarded among Shyamalan's filmography today, Unbreakable underperformed at the box office. Who could have possibly foreseen that misleading the audience about the tone and true content of a movie could have backfired, eh? Number 6, a 2-hour runtime, The Social Network. If you assume that Sony Pictures simply let director David Fincher and writer Aaron Sorkin cook unimpeded during production of their Facebook drama The Social Network, well, that wasn't actually the case at all. The draft of the script which Sorkin turned into Sony totaled a stonking 162 pages, and going by the typical rule of one page equating to 1 minute of screen time, that indicated that the film would be veering dangerously close to 3 hours once the end credits are factored in. Sony insisted that a film about the creation of Facebook couldn't release with such an epic runtime, and that it needed to come in at around 2 hours. Sorkin, however, had a perfect rebuke. Given his tendency to write snappy dialogue that's spoken at a fast speed, the typical page-per-minute rule didn't really apply, and he ascertained the final film would indeed be shorter. Sony were apparently skeptical of Sorkin's claim, and so legend has it that David Fincher timed Sorkin reading the screenplay aloud, where it came in at just under 2 hours, allowing shooting to go ahead without any edits to Sorkin's mammoth script. If you're having fun looking at these weird things that studios have demanded in movies, then hit that subscribe button down below and you'll get even more What Culture videos absolutely every single fantastic, marvelous day. Number 5, Pierce Brosnan can't wear a tuxedo, The Thomas Crown Affair. When MGM put a remake of The Thomas Crown Affair into production and cast Pierce Brosnan as the lead, they had one firm rule. The James Bond star could not wear a tuxedo in the film. Brosnan was in the middle of his 007 tenure at the time, an IP also owned by MGM, and one of the stipulations in his Bond contract was that he couldn't wear a tuxedo in any other film until his time as the iconic spy was over. Presumably the idea was that it would dilute the Bond branding and allow other films to effectively ride 007's coattails by dressing Brosnan up in a similar garb. So this was the deal that Brosnan made. But given that the Thomas Crown Affair features a fancy ball where Brosnan's character Thomas Crown would absolutely be expected to go black tie, the filmmakers instead opted to have him wear an open shirt and undone tie. So the getup couldn't in any way be called a correctly dressed tuxedo. It's ultimately mildly distracting that this suave billionaire is dressed so coarsely throughout the scene, but given that it stopped Brosnan getting in trouble with the Bond bosses, it was probably for the best, even if it did look a bit weird. Number 4, it needs a white cast member coming to America. When the legendary 1988 Eddie Murphy comedy Coming to America was in pre-production, Paramount Pictures reportedly insisted that the large, predominantly black ensemble cast needed to have one major white cast member. According to Murphy's co-star Arsenio Hall, he and Murphy were given a list of 3 white comedians to choose from, and ultimately picked the late Louis Anderson, who they were friendly and familiar with. In an interview before the release of the 2022 sequel, Coming to America with a 2, Hall said that though he loves Anderson, he and Murphy were forced to include a white actor in the film by the studio, who were bullish about releasing a big-budget Hollywood comedy with an all-black cast. This being the 1980s, it was a predictably conservative response from a movie studio fretting over their bottom line, even though it's safe to say that the bulk of Coming to America's $350 million box office gross wasn't at all a result of Anderson's presence, was it? Number 3, more nudity, Blade Runner. The annals of Hollywood history are littered with studio notes which might be kindly deemed brain dead. And even though he'd firmly proven his talents on Alien, Ridley Scott still had to deal with some ridiculous studio demands while making his 1982 opus Blade Runner. It's hardly a secret that Scott battled Warner Brothers over the final cut of the film, but perhaps their most peculiar request of all? More nudity. Right. In reference to the sequence where Deckard meets replicant Zora in her dressing room, an unnamed studio executive listed only as AL asked for there to be more TITS. You can spell, work it out. Somewhat ironically, the widely maligned theatrical cut of Blade Runner doesn't actually feature any nudity at all, though for Scott's later director's cut and his definitive final cut, Zora is briefly seen topless after having a shower. I mean, the studio technically won this argument in the end then, and yet the topless nudity couldn't be called gratuitous in the slightest. It just feels like a natural part of the scene and nothing more really. Good note then, I guess. Number 2, Jonah Hill can't touch a PlayStation controller. Superbad. It's hardly a secret that corporations are fiercely protective of how their precious brands are depicted in entertainment media. And to that end, during production of 2007's hit comedy Superbad, Sony insisted that their PlayStation 2 console could not be touched by Jonah Hill's character Seth. Though we see Michael Cera's Evan briefly playing the getaway Black Monday in the film, Seth is never seen touching a controller due to mandate of Sony, who, as the owner of Superbad's production company Columbia Pictures, had the latitude to make that call. As for why they didn't want Hill anywhere near their console, well, according to the film's co-writer and star Seth Rogen in a recent SXSW interview, Sony found Hill's foul-mouthed teenager so reprehensible and vile that they insisted director Greg Mottola not shoot him interacting with their gaming products. Charming. Hilariously, Rogen added that he found the studio notes somewhat insulting, given that, Seth is shocker based on his own teen self, though ultimately the filmmakers acquiesced to the demand. Number 1, redubbing the N-word in a Civil War movie, Ride with the Devil. Given that Ang Lee's 1999 western Ride with the Devil is an R-rated film about the American Civil War, it's not terribly surprising that it features numerous uses of the N-word, as is period accurate and certainly not something endorsed by the movie. However, Studio USA Films demanded that the film's more discomforting language be redubbed for viewings on airplanes, and asked that Jeffrey Wright clean up his big line near the end of the movie. Wright's former slave, Daniel Holt, defiantly says, "I ain't never again gonna be nobody's N-word," with the studio wanting him to change the offending word to Negro. Wright, however, flatly refused to soften the character's dialogue to make the film a more palatable experience for general audiences. And because he said no, the studio simply brought in another actor to do the dubbing instead. Given that the film's use of language is crucial to its overall historical context, it is certainly a bad look on the studio's part. I mean, why participate in the creation of a movie about the black experience in the US only to sanitize it?